What actions would you take if those entrusted with your safety abandoned you in your time of greatest need? This is my tale, and believe me, you won't fathom the depths it reaches. Before we embark on this journey, be sure to like, subscribe, and activate notifications, for you'll want to discover how it all unfolds. My name is Tyler Brooks, and at 22 years old, I have come to understand a painful truth. Those who are meant to safeguard you can often be the very ones who remain passive while you are being shattered. I was raised in what appeared to be a typical suburban household: 2 parents, a younger brother, and myself, the eldest. To the outside world, we likely seemed unremarkable. My father toiled away for long hours, while my mother remained a constant presence within the home. My brother, Jason Brooks, basked in the adoration of our family, the golden child in their eyes. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the one who stirred little trouble, preferring the company of books and music over sports or neighborly gatherings. This was the label that others seemed eager to attach to me. Within the confines of the house, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Jason Brooks was beyond reproach. Each of his achievements, regardless of its insignificance, was hailed as if he had just discovered a groundbreaking cure. When he netted a goal in soccer, my parents celebrated it online for days on end. Yet, if I excelled in an exam, it barely garnered a mention. If Jason Brooks neglected his chores, there were always justifications: he's tired, or he has too much on his plate. If I forgot, it was a sign of my laziness, ungratefulness, and irresponsibility. Initially, I believed it to be the typical sibling rivalry, a natural consequence of the varying treatment of children. However, as time passed, it became evident that it was not rivalry at all. It was favoritism. The older I grew, the clearer this truth became. By the time high school rolled around, Jason Brooks had perfected the craft of cruelty in the shadows. He would push me against walls, ridicule me in front of his peers, and label me with names like despair or the accident. If I confided in my parents, they would merely shake their heads and chuckle. "Boys will be boys," my father would often remark. Or worse still, he might suggest that I had provoked him. My mother, on the other hand, would merely sigh and advise me to avoid making waves. I soon realized that if anything were to transpire between Jason Brooks and me, seeking assistance would be futile. I was entirely alone in this. That fateful night, the one that altered everything, began like any other. I had gone to bed late, having wrapped up some freelance work on my laptop. It was approximately 2 in the morning when I felt a rough grip seize me. Before I could fully awaken, I was yanked from my bed, my arm twisted as Jason Brooks's voice hissed, "Get up, loser." I stumbled, still half asleep, struggling to comprehend the unfolding chaos. My heart raced as he pulled me toward the back door, his grip tightening painfully. "What are you doing?" I managed to croak, my voice thick with sleep. "You don't belong here," he hissed, pushing me ahead. "You don't belong here. Mom and Dad wish you weren't around. You're merely occupying space." The words pierced through me, sharper than any physical blow. He swung the door open and propelled me into the frigid yard. I stumbled over the steps, landing on the wet grass, the sudden impact snapping me into full awareness. I gazed upward in astonishment as Jason Brooks stood in the doorway, his figure outlined by the kitchen light that spilled around him. Then my eyes fell upon my parents, positioned by the window, silently observing. They remained still, voiceless, merely watching as their younger son discarded me outside like refuse. "Jason Brooks, stop," I called, my voice cracking, clinging to the hope that someone might intervene, that perhaps this time they would stand up for me. Yet, my father merely folded his arms, and my mother averted her gaze. Jason Brooks sneered, his voice oozing with triumph. "Observe? Their indifference is palpable. It has always been so. In this place, you hold no significance, Tyler Brooks." Silence enveloped the moment. He forcefully closed the door, the sound of the lock echoing in the stillness. I remained on the damp grass, trembling, my gaze fixed on the shadowy window above. The anger ignited within me, a mere flicker at first, but it intensified with every breath I took. Throughout my life, I had practiced patience, enduring their words, their favoritism, their silence. In that fleeting moment, as I crawled back toward the door, my hands trembling and my knees stained with earth, I came to a profound realization. Something within me had shattered, making way for something entirely new. With a surge of determination, I managed to push the door open, finding that Jason Brooks had indeed left it unlocked. I stumbled back inside, enveloped in a chilling wave of cold and the weight of humiliation. The house lay in silence. Yet that stillness seemed to vibrate, as if it were poised for an impending moment. My parents' door stood closed, the glow beneath it barely flickering. From above, the distant sound of Jason Brooks's laughter lingered in the air. My heart raced, a drumbeat of urgency echoing in my chest. In an instant, before I could grasp the enormity of it all, an event unfolded, one that would alter the course of everything. It was a sound so jarring, it could rouse the entire neighborhood, prompting frantic calls to 911. But I'll save that for later. To grasp the true extent of the fissures within this family, one must recognize that what unfolded was far from mere happenstance. It was the culmination of years steeped in silence, cruelty, and betrayal, erupting in a single, fateful evening. Upon re-entering that night, the house enveloped me in a chill more profound than the yard from which I had just been cast. My clothes clung damply to my skin, and each step I took across the creaking wooden floor resonated louder than it ought to have, as if the house itself was intent on reminding me of my outsider status. From upstairs, Jason Brooks's muffled laughter seeped through the walls, likely a self-congratulatory echo of his recent exploits. The door to my parents' room remained firmly closed, an absence of sound emanating from within, as though their silence was a conscious choice, laden with intention. I retreated to my own room, closed the door behind me, and perched on the edge of my bed. It was in that moment that I first grasped the extent of the careful orchestration at play. What transpired in the yard was not merely a singular occurrence. It served as the culmination of a long-simmering tension. In reality, the events that preceded it had been accumulating over the years. I had come to accept my place within the family as that of a mere shadow, an entity uncelebrated, unprotected, and unseen. Yet, as I reflected on this, I began to uncover the myriad of small moments that had eroded my sense of self long before that fateful night. Take, for example, the holidays. Each Christmas morning, Jason Brooks would find himself surrounded by an abundance of gifts, shiny new clothes, the most recent gaming consoles, and high-end sneakers. My own collection was always modest in comparison, and whenever I inquired about it, my mother would respond, "Well, Jason Brooks is still growing. He needs these things." Or my father would simply shrug and murmur, "You're older, you don't need toys." Yet, it wasn't the toys that mattered. It was the significance behind those gifts. Each smile that graced Jason Brooks's face reflected my parents' approval, while my own thrill was stifled, dismissed as if it were something to be ashamed of. Even birthdays eluded me. When I turned 16, a milestone I had long envisioned, there was no party, no dinner out to celebrate. When Jason Brooks reached the age of 13, my parents decided to rent a hall and extend invitations to the entire neighborhood. "It's his bar mitzvah of becoming a teenager," my dad quipped. Despite our lack of religious affiliation, they framed the occasion as if Jason Brooks were a monarch taking his rightful place on a throne, while I found myself merely present to assist with the arrangement of balloons. Then came the school days. I toiled diligently, burning the midnight oil, striving to shape a future that could lead me away from that house. When I presented my report card filled with straight A's, my mother merely glanced at it and remarked, "Good, that's what we expect from you." When Jason Brooks managed to pass with C's, a pizza night was in order to celebrate. He put forth his best effort, and his dad would beam with pride. I endeavored to remain unaffected. Yet the reality was that each of those moments diminished me, rendering me invisible, as if my own efforts held worth only when they cast Jason Brooks in a more favorable light. Jason Brooks was acutely aware of his power. He brandished that favoritism as if it were a sword. Should I refuse to share my belongings, he would swiftly dart to our mother, painting me as the selfish one. She would reprimand me, insisting that I had to learn the art of sharing. Whenever I attempted to justify my actions, Jason Brooks would manipulate the narrative, asserting that I had struck him or raised my voice. He possessed a remarkable talent for portraying himself as the victim, and I was weary of being cast as the villain in this ongoing drama. My parents accepted his word without hesitation. For them, his narrative was the ultimate truth. One of the most challenging moments arose when I landed my first job at a local independent coffee shop in Queens, New York. Pride swelled within me as I earned my own money, finally possessing something that belonged solely to me. After weeks of diligent saving, I purchased a used laptop, an essential tool for my schoolwork and freelance endeavors. Yet, within mere days, Jason Brooks had taken it over, downloading games and leaving a trail of crumbs nestled between the keys. As I attempted to intervene, he flashed a smirk and declared, "Mom said you should let me. We're family, we share." When I voiced my grievances to her, she chose to side with him. He is younger, Tyler Brooks. Embrace the role of the bigger person. This notion of being the bigger person has transformed into the guiding principle of my existence. Regardless of Jason Brooks's actions, I was expected to endure them. If he deceived, I was to accept it. If he exerted pressure, I was to remain unmoving. If he took what wasn't his, I had no choice but to release my hold. Yet, throughout it all, my parents lauded him for his self-assuredness and allure. The true turning point, however, arrived at dinner roughly a month prior to that fateful night. As we gathered around the table, Dad nonchalantly brought up the idea of updating the well. Jason Brooks shot me a knowing smirk from across the table and declared, "Well, obviously I'm getting the house. You'll probably end up with Dad's old golf clubs or something." I let out a bitter laugh and inquired, "Why would you say that?" Before Jason Brooks had a chance to respond, my mother interjected with a smile. "Well, it makes sense. You're independent. You'll find a way to navigate through it all. Jason Brooks will require additional support." That phrase lingered in my mind. It transcended mere finances or legacy. It was the validation of a truth I had long sensed. They regarded me as disposable, a mere placeholder, an individual who required no care, warranted no protection, and held no claim to anything. Not even a sense of belonging. As Jason Brooks pulled me into the yard that night, with my parents watching from the window, their inaction was no surprise. It was a familiar scene, a reflection of the people they had always been, and yet, witnessing it so vividly, so unfiltered and irrefutable, ignited a tempest within me. I found myself on my bed that night, drenched and quaking, my thoughts spiraling through each recollection, each rejection, every instance they had favored him over me. My fists tightened, my jaw throbbed from the tension of clenching my teeth. For the first time, I experienced not just pain, but a deep-seated anger. An anger so intense that it robbed me of sleep. Fueled by a simmering rage, I began to contemplate my next move with a clarity that was both unsettling and illuminating. It was in that moment that the night transformed, as the stillness gave way to a whirlwind of turmoil. For in the hours that followed, the very foundation of that house would tremble, rousing the neighbors from their slumber and summoning the police with an urgent fervor. Yet, before I delve into that pivotal moment, it is essential to grasp that this tale extends far beyond a single, harrowing night. Years of favoritism, manipulation, and silence culminated in a moment that shattered the stillness. When it broke, the sound echoed through the entire block. That night should have concluded as I slipped back into bed, yet it lingered on, refusing to fade away. Sleep eluded me. My chest thudded like a drum, relentlessly pounded from within. Each time I shut my eyes, Jason Brooks's face loomed, contorted in that infuriating grin, the door slamming shut before me, my parents gazing at me as if I were a mere stranger. I found myself replaying the moment, convinced that with each iteration, I might uncover a trace of doubt in their demeanor, a fleeting indication that they cared yet were paralyzed by indecision. Yet, there was nothing to be found. Their silence was intentional. The truth gnawed at me, leaving my insides feeling hollow. I rose with the dawn, still clad in the damp shirt from the night before, and made my way to the kitchen in search of water. The house lay in silence, broken only by the soft clinking of dishes. My mother stood at the sink, a gentle hum escaping her lips as though the world outside had not shifted. She cast a fleeting glance over her shoulder as I entered. "Morning," she said with a nonchalance that belied the chaos of the night before, as if I hadn't just been unceremoniously tossed into the yard 6 hours prior. I stood motionless in the doorway. That was it. Morning, my voice broke, piercing through the air, more forceful than I had meant. She frowned, as if I were being irrational. Don't start, Tyler Brooks. Your brother has a tendency to lose his temper. It would have been wiser to remain silent rather than incite him. The impact of those words was as jarring as a splash of ice water, provoking him. He yanked me from my slumber, casting me into the night's embrace. And you both merely stood by, observing. She faced the sink once more, her shoulders taut. You're exaggerating, she said. You're always so dramatic. If it were truly that dire, your father would have intervened. A primal urge to scream surged within me. I longed to shake her until she finally recognized my presence, yet I remained rooted to the spot, fingers clutching the counter, my breath coming in quick, sharp bursts through my nostrils. It was then that Jason Brooks sauntered in, his hair tousled from slumber, yawning as if he had enjoyed the most refreshing night of sleep imaginable. He approached the fridge, retrieved the orange juice, and a smirk spread across his face upon noticing my presence. Oh look, the stray cat has crawled back in, he remarked. I snapped. You can't keep doing this, Jason Brooks. One day. One day what? He filled a glass with juice and leaned against the counter, savoring each sip. Will you finally reveal my secrets? Go ahead. They will not believe you. They never have. And he was indeed correct. My mother cast a sharp glance in my direction. Don't you dare start a fight first thing in the morning, Tyler Brooks. It was then that I understood Jason Brooks was not merely unkind. He was shielded. He was aware of it. He donned their favoritism, as if it were a suit of armor, understanding that regardless of his actions, the blame would inevitably fall upon me. It was an unvoiced family decree, etched into the fabric of every exchange. Jason Brooks was the favored one, while I was relegated to the role of the scapegoat. Yet, the real betrayal, the genuine rupture, unfolded later that week. For months, I had been diligently saving money from my independent coffee shop job in Queens, New York, along with my freelance endeavors. Every spare dollar found its way into a modest savings account I had opened discreetly, keeping it a secret from everyone. It may have been a modest sum, just over $1,500, yet it belonged to me. It stood as evidence that I was not entirely devoid of power. Perhaps, just perhaps, I could forge a path to freedom. One afternoon, I glanced at my account and felt a chill. The balance was alarmingly low, $1.37. My stomach sank, fingers quaking as I perused the transaction history, and there it was, a series of transfers, all directed to my parents' joint account. I felt as though the air had been sucked from my lungs. I burst into the living room, where my dad sat engrossed in the television. Where's my money? I demanded, raising my phone as if it were a beacon of urgency. He scarcely diverted his gaze from the screen. Relax, he replied. Dismissively, it was relocated. We did it. My voice wavered. That represented my hard-earned savings. Countless months of effort. You can't simply take it away. Dad let out a sigh, as though I were merely an irritating child. Don't be dramatic, he said. We needed it for Jason Brooks. He is becoming a member of a travel soccer team, and the costs are quite substantial. At this moment, you don't require the funds. He does. I gazed at him, my heart constricted. You robbed me. You simply seized it. It's not stealing, Mom interjected from the doorway. It's family money. You're part of this household. You cannot pretend to be apart from this. I sensed the earth shift beneath my feet. All those sleepless nights spent laboring. Every shift I pushed through, all for the sake of carving out a fragment of freedom, it had vanished. Not merely vanished, but delivered straight into the hands of the very brother who had cast me out while they all looked on. And Jason Brooks was aware. That evening at the dinner table, he leaned in, a smirk playing on his lips, and whispered, "Thanks for sponsoring my season, loser." In that moment, something within me shattered. It was not the familiar, silent pain I had borne for years, not the gradual throb of being ignored. This was something else entirely. This was treachery, so piercing it struck like a blade to the back. My parents hadn't merely overlooked me. They had deliberately selected him, siphoned away my essence, and abandoned me with emptiness. And Jason Brooks had mocked me for it, his laughter ringing in my ears. That night, as I lay awake gazing at the ceiling, I sensed a transformation. The grief, the humiliation, it solidified. For the first time in my existence, I no longer felt powerless. Clarity washed over me. They had illuminated precisely my position, not as a son, not as a sibling, not even as an individual with entitlements, merely a tool to be exploited. Upon glimpsing that truth, I realized returning to ignorance was no longer an option. A transformation was imperative, yet I remained unaware that the shift was already in motion, approaching with remarkable speed. A tempest was gathering within those walls, a force more thunderous and devastating than anyone could have anticipated. And when it unleashed its fury, it would not merely shake us to our core, it would rouse the entire neighborhood from slumber. The descent to rock bottom was not marked by a singular, deafening crash. Instead, it unfolded gradually, like a tide inching upward with each passing day, until the stark realization struck me I was already submerged. Once the money vanished, a part of me ceased to resist in plain sight. For the first time, I found myself silent in the face of Jason Brooks's mockery and my parents' indifference. An emptiness enveloped me, as if I had been hollowed out from within. Each morning, I would rise, make my way to the independent coffee shop in Queens, New York, return home, and dwell in silence. Jason Brooks, ever observant, took note. He fed off my responses. And when I ceased to provide them, he only intensified his efforts. He would tap on my bedroom door at night, a mischievous laugh escaping him when I finally opened it. My clothes would often find their way to the yard after he rummaged through the hamper. There was that one time he inadvertently spilled something over the laptop I had worked so hard to save for, the very one I had purchased before they invaded my account. My mother let out a resigned sigh and remarked, "Accidents happen, Tyler Brooks. Don't blow it out of proportion." Yet, the most painful aspect wasn't the cruelty of Jason Brooks, it was the void that lingered at the dinner table. The way my parents leaned in, captivated by his words, nodding in agreement, posing questions, and smiling. Yet, whenever I attempted to weave myself into the dialogue, they swiftly silenced me. Whenever I spoke of work, my father would respond with a mere grunt. If I dared to mention school, my mother would cast a fleeting glance at Jason Brooks before swiftly diverting the conversation. It felt as though I were a specter in my own house, only acknowledged when they required assistance. One night lingers in my memory more vividly than the others. It was late, perhaps around 11 p.m., and I found myself at the kitchen table. My homework sprawled before me. With finals looming, I felt an urgent need to grasp onto some semblance of accomplishment, a fragment of success that still belonged to me. Jason Brooks strolled in, snatched my notebook, and began to leaf through the pages. "Wow," he said with a hint of derision. "You genuinely believe this holds any significance? You're just squandering your time. You will never amount to anything," he says. "Just book smart, lacking the skills for the real world. Forever destined to toil at that independent coffee shop in Queens, New York." I seized the notebook once more, my hands trembling with urgency. "At least I am taking action. At least I am making an effort." He leaned in, a smirk playing on his lips. "Effort holds no weight if it goes unnoticed." And that's when it caught my eye. My parents lingered in the doorway, having absorbed every word. For a fleeting moment, I dared to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they would finally speak up, finally defend me. Yet, Dad merely chuckled and remarked, "Jason Brooks has a valid point. Don't squander your life, Tyler Brooks." Mom offered a faint smile and nodded in agreement. The sensation is beyond words. It was as if the very ground beneath me crumbled away, and I continued to plummet long after I made contact with the earth. This was no longer merely a matter of favoritism. It was a moment of undeniable clarity, a realization that they held him in high regard. They regarded me merely as a transient figure, a mere shadow who could never rise to the brilliance of their favored one. That night, sleep eluded me. I settled by the window in my room, gazing at the streetlights while the subtle sounds of the neighborhood enveloped me. Somewhere beyond, children were tiptoeing home after an evening spent with friends. Somewhere beyond, families were sharing laughter over late-night snacks. In a distant realm, there existed a genuine bond among people. A connection I yearned for yet found elusive within these walls. It dawned on me that as long as I persisted in seeking validation from those who had long since deemed me unworthy, that warmth would remain forever out of reach. Thus began my meticulous planning. Not for revenge, not at this moment, but for an escape. Stealthily, with great care, I took on additional shifts at work, keeping it to myself, and began to accumulate a new stash of savings from cash tips. I offered to cover closing shifts, allowing me to linger outside longer, to savor the air before returning to that house. In the quiet moments, I delved into the world of affordable apartments, perusing rental boards online when no one was around to see. Undoubtedly, it was a challenge. Jason Brooks was perpetually prying into my affairs, and my parents had a tendency to appropriate my belongings. Thus, I had to think outside the box. I concealed cash within the pages of forgotten notebooks, relics he would never lay his hands on. I informed my parents of my late nights at the library, while in truth, I was rendezvousing with a friend who had promised to assist me in securing a place to call my own when the time came. Yet, with each step forward, an unseen force would pull me back into the depths. One evening, I returned home to discover Jason Brooks perched on my bed, casually scrolling through my phone. He had cracked my passcode my birthday and wore a triumphant grin as he waved the device in my direction. Searching for apartments, are we? Where do you think you'll end up, loser? You can't afford a thing. You will find your way back to me. A knot formed in my stomach. Panic beginning to take hold. Return it to me, I urged, my voice barely above a whisper. He chuckled, flinging it onto the bed. Relax. I won't say a word to them, yet perhaps I shall, should you continue to vex me. That ominous threat loomed above me like a guillotine. From that moment forward, I found myself treading with caution, yet an undercurrent of paranoia coursed through me. Each stride I took toward liberation seemed precarious, as if Jason Brooks could effortlessly reclaim it with a mere smirk. Nevertheless, the harder they pressed me down, the more resolute I grew in my defiance. I toiled with relentless determination, accumulating my savings while maintaining a low profile. Externally, I appeared subdued, obedient, and worn. Yet, within me, a quiet storm was brewing, a smoldering flame, nourished by each insult, every act of thievery, each betrayal. What I was unaware of at the time was that all of this, the pilfered funds, the shattered trust, the long stretches of silence, was steering me toward a moment of reckoning. And soon, that moment would arrive, not in silence this time, but in a manner that rattled the walls, startled the neighbors, and summoned flashing red and blue lights to our tranquil suburban street. It's peculiar how the lowest point can subtly transform into a turning point. After weeks of existing like a specter in my own home, something changed, not with my family. They remained as harsh and indifferent as always. But with me, I ceased to view their approval as a coveted trophy. Rather, I began to regard my circumstances as a challenge. If I was not appreciated within those walls, I would seek worth in other realms. The initial ascent began with labor. I had been grasping onto that independent coffee shop in Queens, New York, as my lifeline. Initially, it served merely as a means to earn money, to procure myself fragments of freedom. One evening, as I was wrapping up a closing shift, the manager beckoned me over. "Tyler Brooks," he said, his hands busy with a rag. "You're reliable, your punctuality is commendable. You maintain a positive attitude and consistently give your best effort. I could certainly benefit from your assistance in training the new hires." It was a modest shift, merely a bump in responsibility and a slight uptick in hours. Yet, to me, it loomed large. Someone had placed their trust in me. Someone acknowledged my hard work without drawing comparisons to Jason Brooks or dismissing me. I embraced that small promotion with sincerity. And for the first time in ages, I sensed the possibility of a future ahead. With the additional hours, my savings began to flourish once more. I refrained from opening another bank account under my name. My parents had already shown their willingness to access it without a second thought. Instead, I opted for prepaid cards that I could load with modest sums and discreetly conceal in various hiding spots. My cherished refuge lies within an ancient cereal box tucked away in my closet, a place that Jason Brooks would never dare to disturb, for it contained the mundane flakes of a dull brand. Yet, it wasn't just the money that was flourishing in that secretive space. Engaged in a series of modest freelance endeavors, online graphic design, essay editing, and the like, I received a call from one of my clients, who presented an opportunity for more substantial work. "You've got talent," she remarked, her voice resonating with encouragement. "If you're interested, I can introduce you to others in need of similar skills." I agreed without hesitation. In just a month, I found myself juggling shifts at my independent coffee shop in Queens, New York, alongside a reliable stream of freelance income. It may not have been glamorous, but it was undeniably my own. In the meantime, Jason Brooks found himself in a downward spiral. His travel soccer team, partially financed by my pilfered savings, was struggling. He incessantly grumbled about the coach, frequently missed practices, and faced the humiliation of being benched on multiple occasions. Yet, naturally, my parents indulged him. "He simply requires more time," my mother would insist, "or the coach fails to recognize his talent." I observed the entire scene with a subdued sense of satisfaction. For the first time, I noticed the fractures appearing in the golden boy facade. At school, the atmosphere began to change. I maintained my focus on my studies, and one of my teachers put my name forward for a scholarship program. I chose not to share my plans with my family, fearing they might undermine my efforts. Instead, in the solitude of the night, I dedicated myself to the application, crafting my essays with unwavering focus as the world around me fell silent. Constructing a bridge from stone, each piece laid with intention, led me to a sanctuary beyond their grasp. Each minor victory transformed into a celebration of resilience. When Jason Brooks derided my choice to bring home leftover pastries from the independent coffee shop in Queens, New York, I chose to dismiss his taunts and instead shared the treats with a few friends. When my father dismissed my freelance work, declaring it wasn't real money, I held my tongue and allowed him to believe I was squandering my time. Even as my client list grew, their words lost their sting because I possessed undeniable evidence that contradicted their perceptions of me. Curiously, my quietude seemed to unsettle them. Jason Brooks, in particular, appeared perturbed. He was accustomed to my quick retorts, to my self-defense, and to providing him with a counter to challenge. Yet, when I ceased to offer him that gratification, he became increasingly uneasy. He made an effort, tossing my belongings about, lacing his remarks with sarcasm during dinner, yet when I remained unresponsive, his smirk began to wane. Occasionally, I noticed him observing me, a flicker of confusion dancing in his gaze. It seemed he was baffled by the ineffectiveness of his familiar tactics. My parents observed it as well. One evening, my mother inquired, "Why are you so quiet these days?" I merely shrugged, whispering, "Nothing to say." Yet, within me, a smile blossomed. For the first time, the power dynamic was shifting, even if they were unaware. My silence had transformed from a sign of weakness into a calculated strategy. Gradually, opportunities started to accumulate. The scholarship program reached out to me for an interview. My freelance income was sufficient to manage a few months' rent, provided I could locate the ideal place. I even began browsing used cars, envisioning the moment I could finally drive away from that house for good. Yet, the most significant transformation transcended mere finances or accolades. It was within me. The flame that had long been extinguished by their bias and harshness had, at last, ignited once more. I was no longer merely existing. I was constructing, with a quiet diligence and a clear intent. Naturally, I kept all of this to myself, allow them to believe I remained the unseen son, the one easily disregarded, the one whom Jason Brooks could mock without fear of reprisal. For the reality was that I possessed something beyond their perception: momentum. And once momentum begins to gather speed, it becomes nearly uncontainable. What I failed to grasp was the speed at which that momentum would intersect with their reality. Before long, all the elements I had been subtly arranging would align, and a mere nudge would cause everything to tumble. Not only for Jason Brooks, but for my parents as well, and when it occurred, it would not be subtle. It would resonate loudly enough for the entire neighborhood to take notice. The groundwork for what lay ahead did not initially strike as a moment of grand revelation. It approached me gradually, much like a tempest brewing before the heavens unleash their fury. Each small stride I took putting in extra hours, freelancing, seeking scholarships was a fragment of a grander design I had yet to recognize until the moment I perceived the intricate connections. It all began with the scholarship interview. I recall the stillness of a classroom after hours, my palms clammy as the panel of educators and local sponsors fired questions my way. I spoke of my dedication, of the independent coffee shop in Queens, New York, of balancing duties while maintaining commendable grades. Yet, I chose not to mention my family. I sought not their pity, but rather their recognition of my resolve. As I stepped out, uncertainty lingered about whether I would leave an impression, yet a sense of lightness enveloped me. For once, I found the opportunity to express myself without the looming presence of Jason Brooks or the indifference of my parents. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail, bearing my name. My mom carelessly tossed it onto the counter, barely glancing at it. I ripped it open in my room, my heart racing, and almost let it slip from my hands when I saw the words, "Congratulations, you've been selected." The scholarship wasn't a full ride, but it was significant, enough to cover my first year of college tuition, something I had quietly feared I might never manage to afford. I kept it to myself, not sharing the news with Jason Brooks or my parents. I carefully placed the letter in the depths of my desk drawer, securing it like a precious gem. I understood that if it were discovered, they would manipulate it, either asserting it was merely family wealth once more or, even more insidiously, diminishing its worth until it lost all its luster. This one belonged to me, and it offered me something far more significant than mere currency leverage. At last, I possessed the evidence that I was not the void they had depicted me as. Simultaneously, my freelance endeavors took an unforeseen twist. One of my clients, a small business proprietor, was so taken with my design that he extended to me a consistent contract. It may not have been monumental, yet it possessed a steady rhythm. He even remarked that if one ever wished to transform this into a profession, it was entirely possible. The talent was undeniably there. That revelation ignited a spark within me. For years, my family had insisted that I lacked any practical skills, that my future was confined to that independent coffee shop in Queens, New York. Yet, here was an outsider, breaking through that toxic narrative, affirming my value. The funds began to accumulate more swiftly than I had anticipated. With the independent coffee shop in Queens, New York, my freelance endeavors, and the recent scholarship, I found myself not merely getting by. I was crafting a strategy for my escape. The outlines were discernible. A modest apartment, perhaps a second-hand car for transportation, and a future where Jason Brooks's voice lingered only as a distant echo in my mind. Yet, the true turning point, the moment that would ultimately upend everything, arrived one night when I caught a conversation I was never meant to overhear. The hour was late as I returned home from a closing shift. The living room lights cast a warm glow, and I lingered by the stairs, drawn in by the hushed, earnest tones of my parents' conversation. My dad remarked on his lack of focus. "The coach has already reached out to me twice. If Jason Brooks doesn't get his act together, he risks losing his position on the team." My mother's voice held a tension that was palpable. We had already poured so much money into this: travel expenses, equipment, everything. It is far too late to withdraw him now. He must find a way to make it succeed. If he fails, what will be the perception? What will the whispers be? I remained motionless on the steps, absorbing the exchange as it unfolded, and then I heard something that sent a chill down my spine. "Perhaps Tyler Brooks can take care of the rest," my mother suggested. "He has been putting in so many hours lately. He has the ability to contribute. It is his duty to contribute." My father nodded in affirmation. Ultimately, it all comes down to family wealth. He requires little for his own needs. I clutched the railing tightly, my knuckles paling to a stark white. There it was once more. that presumption that everything I earned, everything I created, was rightfully theirs. To Jason Brooks, I was not an individual driven by aspirations or desires. I existed merely as a resource, to be extracted until depletion. Yet, in this moment, rather than succumbing to hopelessness, I experienced a piercing sense of clarity. They revealed their playbook to me, brimming with confidence in their favoritism, so assured of my silence that they felt no need to conceal it. In that instant, a significant realization dawned upon me. Should they perceive me as a mere resource, I could wield that expectation to my advantage. Ascending the stairs with a quiet determination, my heart raced and my thoughts spiraled. The conversation echoed relentlessly in my mind. As I pondered the situation, a plan began to crystallize in my mind. They anticipated my continued generosity, my endless sacrifices, my quiet invisibility. But what if I chose a different path? What if I harnessed everything I had been cultivating, the scholarship, the savings, the freelance work, and wielded it in a manner that would catch them completely off guard? For the first time, I contemplated not merely fleeing, but enacting a form of revenge, not a loud, reckless act of vengeance, but rather something subtle and deliberate, mirroring the way they had gradually depleted my spirit over the years. I would harness the knowledge I had gathered in silence, cloaked in invisibility, turning it into a powerful tool. And when the time arrived, when their entire existence hinged on me in a manner they could never foresee, I would stand prepared. There's a peculiar irony in hitting rock bottom. Once you've experienced it, the fear of loss dissipates. In that moment, I found my strength. In that moment, I discovered my liberation. As I lay awake that night, the sound of Jason Brooks snoring echoing from down the hall, I sensed the momentum rising once more. None of us, neither I, nor Jason Brooks, nor my parents, had any inkling of how swiftly everything was destined to converge. And when it finally did, it would transcend mere family discord. It would unfold in the open, a cacophony of noise and disorder, the sort of tumult that would linger in the whispers of neighbors for years to come. Revenge was not a singular, explosive event. It arrived in measured increments, deliberate and subdued, mirroring the way I had been compelled to exist for so long. Perhaps that was the key to its effectiveness. I didn't burst into the living room one night, shouting. I didn't thrust evidence before them. I engaged in their game, embracing silence, patience, and precision, waiting for the opportune moment. The initial step was straightforward: cease to be their resource. For months, they had taken for granted that my money, my time, and my efforts were at the service of Jason Brooks's aspirations. I turned that assumption on its head without a moment's notice. At the independent coffee shop in Queens, New York, I began directing my paychecks onto those prepaid cards, rather than the shared bank account they kept an eye on. The first time Dad inquired, almost nonchalantly, about how much I earned that week, mentioning the need to cover Jason Brooks's tournament fee, I merely shrugged and replied, "Oh." Ours got cut. He accepted it without protest, merely exhaling a weary sigh and muttering about poor leadership. Jason Brooks, naturally, picked up on the change. "Why aren't you giving me rides anymore?" He scoffed one morning when I declined to be his chauffeur for practice. "I'm working later now," I stated with a flat tone. "Can't." He pushed me against the wall. Yet I refused to engage. I simply gazed back, composed, unwavering, resolute. It unsettled him more than any act of defiance could. Yet, the true impact arrived with the scholarship. Recall how my parents had pinned their hopes on me to support Jason Brooks's career? I allowed them to think I was still struggling, still stagnant. Yet, in the shadows, I was engaging with the scholarship committee, securing my acceptance, and orchestrating my departure. I understood that when the truth emerged, the disparity would be harsh. Jason Brooks faltered on the field, draining their resources, while I, the overlooked alternative, was granted chances they never believed I warranted. Yet, I was not satisfied with merely walking away. No, I craved for them to truly understand the weight of my presence, to experience, for a fleeting moment, the sensation of being utterly powerless. That opportunity arrived more swiftly than I had anticipated. One Saturday morning, I stirred awake to the echoes of shouting resonating from downstairs. Jason Brooks found himself benched once more, and the coach had reached out to my father, warning that if Jason didn't improve, he would be cut from the team entirely. My parents were seething, directing their anger not at Jason, but at the coach, the system, and anyone else who could bear the brunt of their frustration. As I stepped into the kitchen, the atmosphere was so charged it felt almost suffocating. Dad faced me, his expression resolute. "Tyler Brooks, you must take care of the new fees. If Jason Brooks is to demonstrate his potential, he must participate in the additional training camp. It's $800. I blinked at him, my gaze lingering. "I don't have it." His voice escalated. "Do not deceive me. You have been laboring without pause. Where is the money headed?" "Rent." I stated it evenly. The word landed in the room like a glass shattering on the floor. My mother stood still, spatula clutched tightly in her hand. "Rent? What rent?" "I'm leaving." I spoke with a calm, unwavering tone. As the month drew to a close, Jason Brooks let out a laugh, one that was both sharp and cruel. "You? It's time to move out. With what money?" I scoffed, suppressing a laugh. My gaze remained fixed elsewhere, avoiding his eyes. I retrieved the scholarship letter from my backpack and slid it across the table toward my parents. "With this, the tuition is taken care of. Between my job and freelancing, I'll manage the rest. I require nothing from you." The air was charged with silence. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for the letter. Dad's face drained of color, his lips parting and closing as if searching for the right words. "And Jason Brooks?" For the first time in years, his confident smirk wavered. "You?" he stuttered, jabbing a finger in my direction. "You can't simply walk away. Who will take care of it? Who will cover your soccer expenses?" I interrupted him, my tone now edged with intensity. "Not me, no longer. You stand alone." The fury that danced across his features was nearly gratifying, nearly. Yet the true sense of fulfillment emerged when my father struck the table with his fist. "You're abandoning your family," he growled. I leaned in, holding his gaze steady, unyielding. "Number. You left me behind ages ago. I am finally turning my back on it all." The confrontation erupted from that point onward. Jason Brooks was shouting. My mother was pleading. And my father was hurling accusations. Yet, I remained composed, every word deliberate. The years of being muted had imparted lessons on mastering my tone. I learned to allow silence to linger until it became intolerable. In that stillness, my words resonated with greater intensity. As I stepped out of the kitchen, the letter safely stowed in my bag, I realized I had transformed the balance of power entirely. At last, they were unable to wield me as a tool. They were unable to deplete my spirit. And even more troubling for them, they sensed my gradual escape from their grasp. Yet, the reckoning was far from over. What transpired next transcended my departure. It encompassed the very essence of the house, the fabric of the neighborhood, and the reputation they clung to with fervor. When that last piece finally settled, it would resonate beyond my family alone. It would be all those within earshot. The repercussions commenced the night prior to my departure. I had maintained my scheme in secrecy, meticulously folding garments into boxes after late shifts, stealthily slipping bags into my friend's car piece by piece. By that time, I had accumulated enough savings to secure a modest studio apartment, and the scholarship provided the stability I craved. Everything was in place. Yet, true to form, Jason Brooks refused to allow matters to conclude peacefully. I was sealing the final box when he stormed into my room, unannounced. His face was flushed, his eyes frantic. "You're not going anywhere," he declared sharply. "My parents declared this place to be my home," insisting that I couldn't simply walk away. I didn't even bother to lift my gaze. "Observe me." That ignited his fury. He surged forward, snatching the box from my grasp, ripping it open and flinging my clothes across the floor. "Do you believe yourself superior to me now? Do you think you can simply walk away and leave me appearing foolish?" I rose slowly, maintaining a steady tone. "You don't require my assistance to appear foolish, Jason Brooks. You've accomplished that all by yourself." His face contorted with fury. Before I could retreat, he forcefully pushed me against the wall. My head struck the plaster with a muted thump. For a fleeting instant, stars twirled in my sight. Yet, as I blinked them into oblivion, another scene emerged. My parents stood in the doorway, observing, reminiscent of that night when he pulled me into the yard. This time, I did not crawl. I thrust Jason Brooks away from me with a strength that astonished even me. "Touch me again," I warned, my voice low and unwavering. "And you'll regret it." He let out a laugh, though it trembled, lacking sincerity. "What will you do? Call the police?" "They'll side with me, not you." "They always do." In that moment, I retrieved my phone from my pocket. "No," I replied with a calm certainty, for I had already captured every detail. The smirk on his face faded away. For weeks, I had tread carefully. Each insult, every shove, and all the demands for money were meticulously documented. I possessed recordings, screenshots, and even copies of the bank transfers that revealed how my savings had inexplicably found their way into their account. I had concealed them, biding my time for the instant they would become essential. Now, in that stifling room, the realization struck me it was time. I pressed the numbers. 20 minutes later, a knock resonated at the front door, its sound reverberating throughout the house. Red and blue lights danced through the curtains, casting an eerie glow. Neighbors emerged from their porches and windows, curiosity etched on their faces as two officers crossed the threshold. Jason Brooks's bravado shattered in an instant. He stuttered, attempted to reshape the narrative, but I played the recordings for all to hear. His voice, laced with mockery and cruelty, echoed through the living room as the officers' expressions turned steely. My parents attempted to intercede, their voices clashing in a cacophony. But the officers silenced them. One of them accused, "You allowed this to happen. You stood idly by while your son was attacked?" In that moment, their silence transformed from a shield into a verdict. The officers were indifferent to notions of golden children or familial bias. Their focus was solely on the evidence, and I possessed an abundance of it. Jason Brooks found himself handcuffed in full view of our neighbors, his cries for justice swallowed by the harsh clink of metal. My parents stood paralyzed, their faces drained of color, as the facade of our perfect family crumbled beneath the harsh glare of police lights. Whispers began to ripple through the street, phones raised to capture the moment, the narrative already taking shape in the fabric of neighborhood gossip. As they escorted Jason Brooks away, he twisted his head, his eyes aflame with fury. "You ruined me," he spat. I met his fierce gaze, my voice steady, resolute. "No, Jason Brooks, you brought this upon yourself. I merely ceased to shield you." The officers acknowledged me with nods, one of them whispering, "You made the right choice." For the first time in my life, I embraced the truth. I didn't linger in uncertainty. I seized my final box, brushed past my parents' astonished expressions, and ventured out into the crisp night air. The air carried a distinct quality, lighter and more acute than before. Behind me, the pulsating lights illuminated the house of my childhood, a structure that had never quite felt like home, casting hues reminiscent of flames. Neighbors observed, some murmuring, others offering nods that hinted at a semblance of respect. I felt indifferent. I had finished seeking their validation, or that of anyone else. As I settled into my friend's car, a box resting on my lap, I cast a final glance behind me. My parents stood on the porch, diminutive and helpless, as they watched their golden son being taken away in the back of a squad car. For years, they had insisted I was nothing. Yet, in that moment, with the neighborhood stirred awake, police lights flashing, and their world crumbling, I came to understand the truth. I had been their scapegoat, their shadow, their expendable one. But now I was free, and they would never forget the night they lost everything, for the son they overlooked had finally found his voice.